What do you see now in the longevity world that people should steer far away from? And what are something that people should actually do?
I think it's pretty easy. If the information being put out there cannot be substantiated by a cross-section, it probably isn't right.
Functional medicine didn't become global just because of ideas. It scaled because someone built the infrastructure underneath it.
Today's guest is Chris Moore, a foundational force in the field. He's the co-founder and CEO of Nordic Group, and through Nordic Laboratories, he's supported practitioners worldwide with advanced diagnostics, genetics, and clinical tools. This is a rare behind-the-scenes conversation with one of the builders who shaped the industry.
Chris, throughout the years, you're one of the people in the world that's seen the most about longevity, what's been hyped, what's fake, what's actually real. You also just spent time with Brian Johnson. What do you see now in the longevity world that people should steer far away from? And what are something that people should actually use?
I think it's pretty easy. If the information being put out there cannot be substantiated by a cross-section, probably isn't right. It's pretty logical. If something works, there'll be more than one person offering it. And therefore, when these outbursts from social media about one thing or the other doesn't marry up with the data and information in a broader cross-section, you should stay away from it. Seems logical.
And what about the saying that it takes around 14 years for something in the health scene before we learn about it to become mainstream? When do we know when something is about to break through and there's just few people that know it? And when do we know, like, this is just like one person promoting something really hard?
Again, I'm not saying that outlandish thing doesn't play a role, but if you're not competent enough to understand what the information really is, I would stay away from it. It doesn't mean to say it doesn't have a value. It just means to say probably keep away now. But there are lots of people out there that can test it and are testing it and challenging our biology in different ways to say, can we perform better? And ultimately, everything is around the cell. Can we get our cells to function as if it's a smooth running motor, that there is no guns from oil or dirt, that misfires in pistons or anything else like that? It's a beautiful biological system that's given every opportunity to deliver performance for you.
So you said the cells are the most important thing. Can you elaborate a bit on that?
Yeah, we're built up. We're made of cells. That's everything. That's life. So from a DNA production, we have replication of our DNA to produce the environment from which our body performs. If you don't have good replication, or if it's challenged, if it's had stresses that don't allow it to perform perfectly, then that will impair your ability to function biologically. And then you'll get all these symptoms that might be a headache, or it might be a stomach complaint, or it might later be a heart problem, or it might be a liver problem, etc. So clearly, if we have a system that allows the body to repair things before the damage is done, then we're in good shape. So therefore, cellular performance is, for me, alpha and omega.
And what are sorts of things you can do for cellular performance?
Well, we're in the 2020s, right? So what strikes me as odd is that for 25 years, we've got really hard data on how we perform genetically. 25 years of solid information. And yet, when I go out and give talks around the world, even to doctors, there'll only be 10% of the room that actually done their genetic test. This is, to me, an example of what you just said. Well, we've had knowledge, but people aren't employing it. I would say the number one thing you should do for your health right now, if you haven't done your genetics, is to do that. That's not your full genome. It's not your ancestry. It is simply looking at certain genes that impact how you perform in what we call a nutrigenomic environment. How we, from a nutrition base, can enhance or be impaired due to the environment that we live in.
And if we talk about genetics, because there's been a lot of controversy about it, there's both been 23andMe, then sold the data and so on. And a lot of people took the data from 23andMe, put it into other databases to be able to analyze it. And then I was sitting with a genetic researcher. She was working in a company where they were doing genetic testing for epilepsy. And she was like, I came with all these things like, hey, can do this. And she was like, there were too many overclaims in regard. Where are we on that status, and like what actually matters?
Again, we're at the frontier of human health. We do not have all the answers. Full stop. If we did, we'd be called God, and we would have no disease and we'd be living in Eden. The reality is that we will continue to have disease. We will continue to have impairments in every individual. But the more we know about how each one functions, the more likely it is that we'll see a problem before it occurs, and the more likely it is that we will reduce the impact of not necessarily the one problem, but certainly the comorbidities, i.e. other things that happen at the same time. So 23andMe, I think, is a fantastic company that did a fantastic job, that changed our minds on genetics. That they were run for different reasons than I would run my business, that's true. That they were all data mining, that's true. But what they did was they generalized across the world the idea of doing a genetic test, which makes doctors' lives much easier now when they're talking to a patient and saying, okay, I want to look at your genetics because I want to see how you methylate, or whether your methylation's impaired, or whether your detoxification's impaired, or whether your immune system's impaired from a genetic component. So I think 23andMe did a great job. The fact about the data, listen, my take on this, that data they had is pretty much worthless. I wouldn't be worried if I had my data sold by 23andMe. No one's going to work out how I function.
No. But just going into genes, so my parents come from a generation thinking everything is a genes. And often in functional medicine, we say the genes are...
Load the gun.
And the action...
Environment pulls the trigger.
Yeah. Can you tell a little bit more about that so people understand?
So think about building a house. You cannot build more than one story without scaffolding. You put the scaffolding outside and you build the second story and the third story. The scaffolding is your body, your DNA is your body's scaffolding. It is your construct. It is not the bricks and mortar. It is not, if you put the wrong brick in or don't put any mortar in, the building will collapse, but the scaffolding will still be there, right? So think of it that way. Your genes are your scaffolding, what you put in there, your food, your environment, or your drink, whatever, is your, what we call the phenotype, what makes you. So that's your bricks and mortar. So I am very clear on this. You cannot do a longevity strategy, a functional medicine strategy, without including your genetics. That does not mean that you get your gene result and say, I'm perfect, or, oh my God, everything is missing, I'm going to fail, I'm going to break down. No, because your environment is going to determine how your genes express. And we shouldn't spend too much time worrying about the terminology, etc. It's just that certain genes produce what we call enzymes to how we function. And it goes back to that cellular talk. So do your genetics. And I would not do full genome. This is nonsense at this stage. I know lots of companies are telling us they're wonderful and how you're going to get an awesome picture of yourself. No, you're not. You're going to get a lot of noise with a lot of complications into how do you interpret it. Don't do it.
So it's simply because it's too much noise, things we don't know yet. So like you risk taking the wrong conclusions from it, or just that it's actually useless, it's not precise. Like where are we on that?
Well, if you remember, I often smile about this because Bill Clinton stood on the steps of the White House and said, we've just made one great step towards the God gene or the God creation in the Genome Project.
Yeah.
But even then, in 2001 or whatever it was, only 97% of our genome was understood. That means 3% wasn't. And today we think it's only 95%. We've actually regressed. So there's stuff in our genome that we don't understand. That's not even found yet. So trying to suggest you can do a full genome, A, is incorrect. You cannot. And secondly, a lot of these interactions aren't understood, but there are a number of genes, what we call those nutrigenomic genes, that we do have a lot of evidence for and that are compelling, and that is the first stage of us understanding that scaffolding. So in the 2020s, no, you will not get a complete picture of yourself, but you will get a step towards it. And that is a very valuable step. And I cannot understand anybody who is involved in longevity not doing a genetic test.
So your recommendation would be do the genetic test as the first thing?
I would say if you're born today as that tiny little baby, do their genetics immediately.
Okay. So I did mine, and one of the things, and it was also from your company, was that B vitamins, I am not that good at absorbing them. And I also had blood tests earlier that said that my B12 was low. So that kind of makes sense. That it also said that I was more likely to get diabetes too. I was in the risk of that. but I exercise a lot, so it doesn't seem and my numbers are good. So that's some of the things it can do. What are the other things where these gene tests can actually tell us?
Well, let's look on that B vitamin thing, because if you had just done just done the genetics alone, it is only indicative that your absorption of vitamin B6, B12, and folate may be impaired. It is not definitive. So what is good is that you go ahead and do a blood test and say, oh, my vitamin B12 is low. That marries up with my genetics. So now, from now on, I do need to be aware that my vitamin B12 could be impaired, and I should continually look to make sure that the levels are at the right amount. That's individualization. That is personalization of healthcare. You are not the same as your brother, your sister, your mother, your father, your grandparents, your children. You are unique. And we have to get away from this idea that, oh, my brother didn't have this problem. That's again, so that is the individualization. That's a perfect example. The other areas that we can look at that is really quite valuable is everything from immune system to digestive system or detoxification system, what we call methylation, which is basically what you were talking about. But we also have very good understanding of how we have a test called DNA Mind that looks at how the brain functions from a genetic perspective or could be impaired. It doesn't, again, mean X, Y, or Z, but it does mean that you can have genes that can be supported by certain interventions. We did this wonderful study in the University of Las Vegas about 2 years ago called Grow Baby, where we took the genes of 100 pregnant women with a predicted preterm birth rate of 11% preterm. So that means a child born too early. They also have a very high risk in any community of gestational diabetes. And they also have a high risk of in any pregnancy of a miscarriage. So what we wanted to see was, could we change what we call the phenotype of that pregnancy so that their mother didn't miscarry, that she didn't develop gestational diabetes, and she did deliver a child to term at normal weight, which are two of the biggest mitigators of all-cause mortality for the rest of your life. Born to term at normal weight. And so when Granny says, oh, my grandson came out, he was huge, that's not a great thing. Okay. Right? Grannies, that's not a great thing. But my baby grandson came out right in the middle of the weight, 3,700 grams or something. And at term, the mother has given her child the best chance in life to mitigate disease and avoid the challenges that a lot of people might suffer. So at the end of our study, remember there was 11% preterm birth rate predicted. We had 1%. That is a phenomenal change. And just looking at the genetics and then changing some of the phenotype picture, very small things. It wasn't big. So now we just got funded for a very big project in North Carolina. And that will look at, I think, 500 women that will hopefully support the same thing. So here's an example of using genetics in a pregnancy to help an unborn child be born to term at normal weight, help the mother avoid gestational diabetes. We had, I think, 0 gestational diabetes in the project, and the opportunity for a human to develop optimally. Why would you not want to do that? And if you're looking at getting pregnant, I would think very carefully about what I'm going to do in preparation for conception. I appreciate that the world isn't always that well planned, but if you are planning, think about what should I be doing, not for the conception, but rather in the weeks and months prior to that.
So it's like 3 to 6 months before, like the semen from the men.
Yes.
So that what we do before, where men are waking up like 6 to 3 months before, your lifestyle have an impact on the trajectory for your kid.
Correct. And remember that a woman who delivers a baby girl, so the mother provides the environment for her grandchildren. The oocytes that her daughter will produce from the age of 14 or what have you are actually hers. So the grandmother plays an enormous role in the development of their grandchildren, but they're not aware of it.
Yeah.
But that preparation work can have generational impact.
So 2 things I want to touch on. First is like, what were some of the interventions you did? And the second thing, are we then doomed if we had mothers that were smoking or other things? Like, what can we actually do to to change the trajectory so we don't just think that we were giving a bad hand. So if we start on some of the interventions, and then we'll go back to what do you do if you're giving not the best hand?
Well, with this project in Las Vegas, the main interventions were some basic nutrients, vitamin D, fish oil, magnesium, carnitine, which is a slightly odd one, but it's important, and very, very simple communication to the mother about how she should eat, the diet intervention. Because we do understand that not everybody has the enthusiasm around diets. And when I say diet, I mean nutrition. What are the right foods? Not everyone has that yet. I think it will come, but it's not there yet. So how can we help support that knowledge base? And that's what changed the outcome. I mean, it wasn't the genetics that changed the outcome. Just again, be clear, the genetics helped us shape for the mother the strategy that we would perform in what we call that phenotype. For the people like myself who were born to a mother that did smoke, who unfortunately was told by the doctors that having the need to breastfeed me was no longer than 7 days, and that by the age of 3 or 4, I had developed asthma. And I remember going to this huge hospital in Bristol in 1975 and was left in this room as they took this huge X-ray, or probably wasn't a huge X-ray, but for a little boy, I remember it as being this huge thing. And I remember coming home to my parents and saying, I don't like egg and I don't like milk. I'm not going to eat it. And I was 4 years old. And within 6 months, my asthma disappeared. Now, my mother will say that she can't remember that, it wasn't that, etc. But that is an example of the environment changing that genetic impact that was caused perhaps because my mother smoked during pregnancy, perhaps because I didn't get breast milk. But either way, my change in diet as a little 4 or 5-year-old changed the way that my body reacted. And I didn't have to have asthma medicine. I didn't have to go back to that bloody hospital and have another X-ray because ultimately my body repaired. So that's the answer to your question. No, you're not doomed because of what your parents did, but you're impaired. There's no doubt that the pregnancy has a very big impact on your likelihood to survive to 100 without disease.
So what are some of the things that we can actually take control over and do?
Right. So we're now, again, in 2025. I've been building Nordic labs since 1997.
You've seen a lot. You've seen a lot of things come and go.
I have. And really, we had the tools that we can use today already then. We just weren't paying attention. So the first thing that anyone should do really is invest in data. Do not just assume that you should change your diet to X or Y. Do your genetics. Then look at your blood work. Then do your...
And what blood work would you do?
Again, we're assuming people are healthy, whatever that really means. That's a difficult term as well.
They're not super sick. Most people have a little
bit. Exactly. So we have to understand that at all times, and remember, we came from the swamp. We came out of the swamp, right? Bacteria drove us. We survived a lot of stresses. So therefore, we can still survive a lot of stresses. Therefore, a 21st century world, we will survive. But the impact of what we need to look at, from my perspective, is this, what I would call biochemical, nutritional impact. So I'm not so interested in disease markers at all. That's a GP's role, and maybe people are unlucky to have that. But I'm looking at markers that I can use to understand how I perform in a daily basis. So if we just go back, I think if you're looking at longevity and seriously wanting to find out how you perform and not listen to the noise, because everyone will have a take on it. Everyone will say, oh, you should do this, or you should do that. Oh, and they mean well. I don't believe everyone's a charlatan just trying to dismiss it. They mean well, but they don't know you. You know that if you wake up at 6 o'clock in the morning, that you either feel tired or you feel refreshed. So there's no point someone saying you should get up early and do this, that, and the other, if indeed your body requires you to sleep until 9 o'clock. Likewise, no one should tell you to eat a protein-rich or a meat diet if every time you go in the toilet you have diarrhea. I mean, it might be that you need the protein, but apparently you can't digest it.
That goes to the N equals 1.
N equals 1, the single most important equation in medicine. And every day that you think about your health, it should be that.
Yeah.
Don't care what they're doing down the road, across the world. It is what is best for you in your environment.
And for the listeners that haven't heard what N=1 is.
So I first put this up in my deck in about 2015, and it was to a bunch of doctors who had never considered this. They'd always looked at studies that had a big number of people in it, and in that study, it would be able to get out we would be able to identify the standard deviation and where the real impact was. So, for example, if typically it's 120 people is the minimum, but let's say you have 500 people having eaten carrots every day, and 25% of them had better eyesight. That would be interesting data, but only for the 25%. The 75% that don't really care about whether they should eat a carrot, right? So N=1 is saying, well, I don't care about being part of the big project. I want to know about how I function. And so you are your own experiment. And yes, there will be data in there that is confusing, complicated, doesn't always make sense, but it's still you. So back to what we should be testing. I would, in a modern world, if you're traveling, if you're upperly mobile, you should be doing and I'm very cautious about what I'm going to say, a microbiome-like test. I do not believe we should be doing a full microbiome because we simply don't understand it. And
same as the DNA.
Same as the DNA. Just stop with this idea, I'm going to do a microbiome. Okay, what are you going to find? How are you going to change it? What does it mean? We don't know. So therefore, don't push it too fast, too quick. But there is very good data. I think we were the first company in Europe to offer what I would call a functional microbiome test, whereby we can see certain microbes, typically fungus, bacteria, and parasites, that play what we call a dysbiotic function. It's not necessarily what we call a pathogen that you will die from, and neither is it a beneficial, like a lactobacillus, but there's something in between. And actually, they probably have a very important role to play at a certain level. But too much of them becomes too dominant, and then that means that your body has to deal with that. So we know a lot about this, and people that go to a different environment that they grew up in will be exposed to different bacteria. And we have to make sure that it's not shifting that microbiome so that your digestive system is impaired. So I would say, and my investment in my health would definitely include at least 2, maybe even 3 of these stool tests a year.
Okay, that many?
Yeah, because we're constantly being exposed. Again, if you're staying in the same environment and your body is eating, you're eating the same sort of foods, probably you don't need to do it that often. But if you're like me and I travel 200 days a year all over the world, I will be exposed to all sorts of things. And my body has to be able to recover from it. Again, we came from the swamp, we can travel the world, but you will be exposed to things. So trying to understand it before it happens, before the impact happens, and rebalance it is an important thing.
So a few questions for microbiome test. One thing is the accuracy that you spoke about, what do we actually know? Second thing is how fast does it change? Because if you change your diet a lot, suddenly you have a bad stomach. So how much can we count on the data not being so volatile, which I think is a question I have about all the tests, everything from D vitamin, testosterone, and so how do we know? Can you put some words on how stable is it and how valid?
So that goes to a bit of a shift, but that's part of my job. I have been exposed to hundreds of laboratories around the world. In the old days, it's changed a bit now, but in the old days, if I walked into a laboratory that did not have an independent laboratory director that was owned by one person who is the laboratory director, then I wouldn't work with them, because they can't possibly have enough objective opinion on their methodology because they have an economic value as well.
Okay, let's just stop on that because I think this is super important and a nice principle to take out. So if looking at getting a test from a lab, you want to look into, do they have someone that checks the quality that is not owner? Yeah. And you can kind of say like Puri with their supplements, that they have all of their supplements third-party testers, several other companies as well. So that's a way that you know that it's actually clean. So that would be a principle when looking into testing.
I think it's changed a bit because methodologies have got much, much more robust. However, as a company, as I went to look at partners, I would discount 100% any laboratory that did not have an independent laboratory director, someone who was vested in their scientific pride. And when we started Nordic Labs in Finland, I made sure that the lab director was never bound by the success of the company, but was always focused on the quality of production within the laboratory. That's his job. Now, that means you might have a fantastically talented biochemist who has developed an awesome test, but you can't really trust it, and you have to wait until they have a different setup. If they get that independent director, I'm very happy to work with them. But until then, I would have an arm's length relationship. That's the first thing. Next up is you've got to look at that test. What is it using? The methodology, the technology, and who is running it? So you might have a genius who's developed the test, but the person running it has no idea what button they're pressing. And that sounds ridiculous, but just imagine any job in any environment. You know who's good at what they do and who's not so good. In a laboratory, you need them good. You need those people who are very good at pressing the button, because they are the ones who are going to produce that result for you. So then looking at how that lab works is an essential part of my job. Make sure they've got everything in place. Have they checked? And the quality control measures within laboratories today are very, very significant if done properly. There are governing bodies, and there is a requirement. And when you get certain certifications, the requirement is very, very significant. So we have in Finland what's called the ISO 15189 2022 certification. It took me 4 years to get. It's a lot of work, preparation, making sure that every member of staff knows what they're doing, making sure that you understand what happens to a test result when it goes to a patient, and make sure that you've got controls in place to make sure it's as accurate as feasible in 2025. There aren't that many of them. And so that's another easy way to check if your lab partner has a ISO 15189, there's other ISOs, but the 15189 is the highest standard, and the 2022 version is the latest one. And there aren't many of them. In America, they go through what's called CLIA, C-L-I-A. It's not as high as ISO. It is easier to attain, but if a lab doesn't have that in America, then they're probably, then there's a bigger challenge. But so that's the next stage. Then, from remembering that we're thinking of what we call these longevity functional medicine tests. If you do what we call a pathology test, let's call for your the lipids for your cardiovascular function. That is every hospital, every clinic in any country does that every day, and they send to their pathology lab, and they do hundreds, maybe thousands of these tests a day. Functional medicine doesn't do that many, and therefore there are only, I would say, truly 10, 15 labs around the world that are really trustworthy within this sector. However, so that means you have to be able to ship a sample. And when you ship a sample, it has to be stable. And that's part of the job as well. Make sure you stabilize that sample so it gets shipped correctly to the laboratory. And then when the lab produces the results, does someone understand how to interpret them? So it's multiple things goes into the evaluation of a laboratory. And I tell you what, right now, there isn't a laboratory in the world that says they're bad at what they do.
No, of course.
They all say they're good. But I'm here to tell you that's absolutely not true.
I know from Ove Winter, another functional medicine doctor here in Denmark, one of the first, that he would always send, when looking at labs to work with, he would send 2 tests of the same person, and he would send multiple of those to see if he was getting the same result. Because he said, like, you won't believe how many of them are just not accurate. And I know we did a test as well in Kring. We're looking at something with blood tests and so on, and I got a venous test first, and then I got 2 shoulder tests because we thought like it would be cool with these devices. We sent them down. Some of the markers were like perfect, and some of the markers were like 100% off. Where we're like, okay, we cannot push this. We need to wait till this is actually accurate enough.
So I do a lot of those split samples every single week, definitely every month, but most weeks I'm sending off split samples to the lab partners we work with, lab partners we don't work with. One thing about laboratory science is that it's always an evolution. So just because they're not good this year doesn't mean that they don't become good next year or the year after. So I'm very, very cautious about damning anybody. But I'm very quick to say this is not currently good enough for what we need. Because I go out to clinicians all over the world and I'm helping them understand how to employ this in their practices. They need to feel comfortable with the knowledge that they're getting so that their patients, who are the ultimate beneficiary, is getting good data and good information according to what we know today. There is no doubt in 10 years' time, we will know more. But today we have a lot of good information. So that challenge of doing this so-called split samples, you have to be very careful about doing it. And, you need it witnessed because the labs don't like it. If you come back and say, well, you've got two different research results, well, you didn't collect it correctly. Well, I followed your instructions. I did everything exactly as you say. But you must have done something wrong. So you have to have witnesses to it to do it properly. And what I would do, typically I'll do 3 samples on the same day. Then I will do another sample 2 or 3 days later so that I make sure that the numbers are marrying up. And these labs do. Look, they are very good, proficient bodies out there that do great testing. It's not perfect, but it's very good at helping us understand more about ourselves and should be employed.
Something I've always been curious about without us detouring too much is also like the gold standard in different things, right? So what if we send it to a Danish hospital? How many times would they have the exact same value, for example, for D vitamin, testosterone, and so on? Where if you look at a sleep lab, if you look at the accuracy there, that's very low that you get the same results, 2 different people analyzing the data, right? So there's also what error are we allowing in the gold standard, and then what error are we allowing in functional medicine?
I think gold standard is a strange term. I mean, you're using in the Danish system or the British system or any system standards that were developed in the 80s and 90s. They're not gold standard. They are pretty poor, if you ask me, but that's the standard they still maintain. So, I mean, if you look at lipids again for cardio disease, if you have LDL of 6 or above, you're put on statins. If you have 5.9 or below, you're not. That's arbitrary, in my opinion, and clearly wrong in the 2020s. And yet millions of men especially are put on statins because they're told their lipids are too high. That's not a gold standard. That's just poor science.
Yeah. I was more pointing to the gold standard of like that we're testing, that we get the answer 5.5 or 6, that we can see that we're actually getting 5.5. Yeah.
But again, so this has been known for a long time. We call it good laboratory standards.
Yeah.
It typically expects a result to be reproducible within 10%.
Okay. Got it.
And that would be, then you would say that's pretty good.
Yeah.
Actually, and sometimes it can be 20%. It depends on how, if you...
Depends on the metric as well, because 20% can be very little or it can be a lot.
Yeah. And it depends on what you're measuring. So if you're measuring HIV, you don't want to have arbitrary, one way or the other. It has to be precise. And the methodology for HIV is very, very, very good. So if it's positive, unless the laboratory have changed names for some bizarre reason, then that test is positive. But there are other things, such as the LDL, which if you sent to 5 laboratories today, your blood, you would get 5 different results. Fact. Hopefully within that 10%.
Yeah.
And that's the so-called gold standard. And it's not reasonable to expect it to be exactly the same. No. It's not going to happen.
If you move back to the gut testing in regards to how often to do it and how accurate it is, because looking down into your poop, you can also see sometimes there can be different shapes. So you can have the Bristol scale that looks really good, and then there's the last part that looks, sorry for the listeners that don't want to visualize. So scooping up is different things just from one poop. But I guess, as I understand it at least, is that some of these tests can kind of still detect if something is really off.
So again, what are you looking for? That's the query. Are you looking for a pathogen?
Yeah.
Or are you looking for a balance of your gut function so that it doesn't get impaired? I think they're two, you've got to ask that question. There's the longevity listeners who want to build this strategy for living a long and healthy life. You're not wanting to find those pathogens because they're going to impair you. You are looking for an imbalance that can be corrected. Is it perfect? Correct? Maybe not, but it's certainly indicative. I think what we're looking for in this area is a basic base. You get a baseline, and from that baseline, with the good labs, you will see that played out continually.
Yeah.
And again, it's personalized. So your lab test doesn't determine who you are. It's indicative of things that might be functioning or might not. So you try and adjust certain things to get that balance. Collecting a sample, whether it's a blood sample, urine sample, stool sample, is you must follow the instructions. And I have literally hundreds and hundreds of samples coming into us every day, and we are looking at them and going, I wonder if this patient's collected correctly. Now, we get it. It's not, I've lived and worked in this game for 30 years. I know how to collect samples. If I took my car down to a mechanic and the mechanic asked me to start changing the motor, I would not know how to do it, right? So our job as a company is to ensure that people doing our tests feel comfortable with the information, how to collect. But I was in Dubai some months ago with a very good friend who's a doctor, very, very experienced guy. And he'd gone through one of our trainings. And I said, "Oh, doctor, I just want to show you how to collect, how you should be saying to patients and how to collect a stool sample." He goes, "Chris, I've been a doctor 30 years. I do not need you to tell me how to collect." I said, "Well, doctor, just let me explain." And so you collect your sample, and then you're supposed to take the little spoon in the tube and you're supposed to stir your sample all around. The more you mix it, the more homogeneous it becomes. And then you take from different sites, because that does it helps avoid exactly what you were alluding to, that, if you don't take this bit, but you just take this bit, you might have a different result. At the end of me saying this, it only took me a couple of minutes to explain it. And the doctor said, "That's the first time anybody has explained to me how to correctly collect a stool sample." That means that poor doctor has been saying for 30 years, just do it this way. And for 30 years, he's been getting perhaps slightly impaired results. So collecting as biological samples is very, very important. Unfortunately, I've seen too many times people collect incorrectly. That's the doctors, not just the patients. And so education around this is very, very important.
Yeah. If you move away, so if someone has a limited budget, first money being spent on a DNA test, and that DNA test you can use going forward. Then you can do a stool test, depending on how much you travel. So you have kind of an idea.
You must have a baseline, so you must do at least one. But
What would be your next? Would it be getting an Oura ring, a watch? Would it be doing some blood test? Would it be doing a journal?
So the most important functional medicine test is an organic acids test. That is looking at your small intestine. It's showing all the cofactors that are involved. If you get that motor, the small intestine, running smoothly, many, many functions of biology work better. So that for me is the go-to test, the absolutely most important one. But it's also the test that is the most complicated in terms of biochemistry. So again, I'm here thinking of the optimal. I would be doing my genetics to start. That's the baseline. You never have to do it again. Although we see science develop, so realistically, you perhaps would do it in 5 years' time to say, okay, have we got a better understanding? More genes are looked at differently. The stool test,
Quickly for that, you cannot just rerun, like data doesn't just get updated.
No, because, again, it depends which methods you're using. But if what we are doing is qPCR, running on, we all know what PCR is after COVID. But we look at a certain number of genes, so about 80, but you have millions of SNPs. You have 21 to 23,000 genes, but you have millions of SNPs. So that's what gets updated, and you probably need to do it. Methodology also gets better, so it's not impossible to say that a test you do in 10 years' time is more accurate than the one you've done today.
And it might be more than the 80.
And it will be. That's going to happen. If you do a full genome, my advice would be to do the full genome every year, because I'm sure the methodology is going to get better and better.
Okay.
And so therefore, you'll see a lot of changes in those results. But that's different than what we do. Very different. The stool test you would do at least once a year. It's going to give you your biological data set to say how you're functioning and the threats that you might be exposed to. You might have a Helicobacter pylori starting. Why wait until it's a full-blown ulcer if you could have eliminated it? You might have a change in the probiotic bacteria, the lactobacillus, the bifido, and others. If they're depleted, they will impair any number of functions. So if we know that, we would then increase the amounts of probiotics to protect the environment of the gut. Why wait until you have problems around anything from digestion to neurological function? So that's why doing these tests isn't about, oh, I'm sick. No. I'm healthy and I want to remain that way. These tests aid that. The organic acids, again, I would do at least once a year and look at not the whole thing in one go. Take little bits. This is what I'm going to focus on in the next few months. Then I might do a follow-up test and look at the other areas. So I don't think doing a lab test should be looked at as a crisis moment. I think it should be looked at as part of a strategy to perform to my optimum. Then, unfortunately, in the 2020s, what's our biggest change has been environment. And that is pesticides sprayed on the fields. It's microplastics everywhere. Again, I cannot understand why we think it's a good idea to be ingesting plastics. Why drink water from a plastic bottle? Why drink, why put things in a microwave to be heated up in a plastic container, which I've seen people do, which is crazy. These plastics are really polluting our bodies. Heavy metals. There was a lovely study done. I know it doesn't really affect people in the north of Europe, but there's a lovely study done by my friend in the Sudan that demonstrated for every 50 kilometers closer to the oil fields, the amount of toxic metals in the hair of these children grew tremendously.
I saw something come out as well, people living close to golf courts, being neighbors to, and I think it was Alzheimer and Parkinson or something, where we saw the prevalence of that was much higher. I was like, okay.
So I would say to people, please understand that we are exposed to these toxins consistently and continually. And be careful about your choices. So one of the greatest things about Denmark, there are many good things, but one of the greatest ones was the very early adoption of organic farming. And you can live in Denmark and eat close to 100% organically. And fortunately, for me, at least, I made that decision already in 1995, and we decided that everything we could buy should be organic. Yes, it's more expensive. I understand that. And I think when we were younger, we chose not to go on holiday or go out for dinner or anything like this. We wanted organic food. That was a choice. We understood that we didn't want the chemicals in our body. However, here's something that you need to consider. If you think of coffee, let's take that as an example. Organic coffee has something like 30% more antioxidants in it than non-organic coffee. So you naturally get better nutrition. Organic vegetables have much greater variety of antioxidants, and ultimately you don't eat as much. So yes, the cost of that organic squash might be 30% more than a non-organic one. But guess what? You eat 30% less. Your nutrients are there. So I think there's a lot of research that needs to be done about the actual amount of nutrients that you get from eating organically. And then you do the calculation and you go, well, maybe it's not more expensive to live organically.
One thing to talk about organically, I think is important for people sitting and being like, okay, I don't have the money to do all the tests, all the organic and all the stuff. So there's the list of the which ones are most important. So strawberries are the ones most polluted, at least in the US, where avocados are the ones where it matters the most. So anything that kind of have a shelf around it is more protected, like a banana as well. So that's also a good thing to kind of remember. I know many of my biohacker friends as well, even though they buy organic, they put it in, I don't remember, baking powder or something else, something to clean it. Yeah.
I mean, organic, so just taking on organic for a minute, but the organic certifications around the world are not conducive necessarily to good farming. They're conducive to good marketing. So the USDA is pitiful. Just because it has USDA doesn't mean it's organic. It's just checked some boxes. In Europe, it's better. UK, okay. But Denmark and Sweden, fantastic. So if you see the Danish and the Swedish organic certifications, they are looking at the quality of production in a different way than USDA does. And that's, we should be making demands of our authorities. We should be making demands of our farmers. Just a little story for you. At the weekend, I drove 1,000 kilometers south in an electric car, so I didn't use any gas. And I picked up 150 liters of extra virgin olive oil from a friend of mine who's a doctor who runs a very big clinic group, who has a nice house in Corfu. He has his little olive plantation, no pesticides, no nothing on his farm. And the earlier you pluck those olives, the much higher antioxidant levels you get. And so I just wanted to support him and his farm because I'd rather give my money to him than to the supermarket or to a broker in between this that hasn't looked after the integrity of the land, who hasn't looked after the integrity of the farm. So I think we have as consumers a real responsibility to shift behavioralism. We tend just to take whatever the marketing nonsense is. And, if you take a company like Nestle, there has been a big shift in mindset in Nestle over the last few years. I'm not necessarily endorsing Nestle at all. All I'm saying is that consumerism can change behavioralism at corporate level. And we can do that if we all go action together. What Nestle invested in supplements is somewhere close to $7 billion. That's a lot of money. And they've moved a lot of confectionery out. And there's a shift. We need them to be looking after us, not us taking what helps their margins. And if you walk away from a sector, they're not stupid and they will look at the opportunity. So now food supplements is big in the Nestle strategy. So back to farming, Kellogg's. If we can help Kellogg's understand that what we want is pure organic, guess what? Kellogg's will invest in it. And so consumerism has a responsibility to change the behavioralism of our industries. And I wouldn't want to gamble my health based on $1. And that's where I've come from.
So if we go into some rapid fire about different things for longevity. Hyperbaric oxygen chambers. I know you have one. One of the few in Denmark.
Yeah.
Hyped or undervalued?
Complicated. I mean, if that was your longevity hack, then forget it. If you're going to do hyperbaric, make sure you have one in your house and do it regularly. Maybe not every day, but 3, 4, 5 times a week over a period of time. Then I think it has a tremendous impact. I wouldn't go to longevity center and do a hyperbaric session because it's just a waste of time. If you go to the longevity center and do it every day for 2 weeks, 3 weeks, 4 weeks, the Israeli studies have shown that you need to do it for 6 weeks, I think, and they go much deeper than what I do. And they say, if you don't do that, your telomere length doesn't increase. If that's your only intervention, that might be right. But I think there's multiple things. So do I think hyperbaric is overhyped? Absolutely. Do I think it's a value proposition that you should consider? Absolutely. But make sure you understand why you're doing it.
Got it. I saw one of the Israeli studies was 60 times over 90 days. It increased the telomere length. I think it was like 20% decrease senescent cells and other things. And there was people that were over 63 and they did nothing else.
I think it's naive.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm not dismissing what they found in the publication, but I think they had to be in there 90 minutes.
Something like that. An hour, 90 minutes. There's a lot of time.
And it's deep. So there's a lot of pressure. So again, I'm not dismissing the
cynical.
Science. It's a nice consideration and we should be thinking it. But,
and you have one yourself.
And I have one. But mine isn't a hard chamber. It's a soft chamber. And people will go, oh, it's not worth doing. On the contrary, I can show you data on myself over a long period of time that hyperbaric, even at the lower levels, has a big impact on how I perform. So you have to just think, where's the hype? Where's the science? And where's the validation? And what am I trying to achieve from it?
What's your take on IV? Because I just got an article sent that there might actually be microplastic in a lot of the IV. So he was like, don't do it.
I mean, again, so I agree with the concern, number one. And I look at those IV pouches when they go into me and I go, here we go. But we're getting exposed to microplastics anyway. Now, this might be a bit radical and it's a good query. But I think the value proposition of IV currently, given what we're looking at today, is that it's a very valuable way of getting nutrients at a very high level very quickly. I don't think all IVs are valid, but it's part of a program. And if you do it once, probably worthless. But if you do it over the strategy, I think they're interesting. And I certainly do.
Yeah. We didn't discuss so much. I think we agree on that. There's the basics is some kind of movement is essential. Real food, as we talked about, non-organic, proper sleep, proper stress management, having a community, good relationships is important. So that's kind of the foundation before doing hyperbaric oxygen chamber.
Yeah, sure. I mean, again, we've also got to, you've got to say, where are you in your life? Unfortunately, too many people are sick. That's the reality. The biohacker community, who I love very much, and I think they're a wonderful bunch of people, on the whole, have some form of clinical condition. There are very, very few I meet that say, oh, I'm perfect. I'm going to fire even higher. They've all got something. That's okay. That's reality. That's humanity. But so if you're 20 and you're not performing neurologically perfectly, if you have digestive challenges, if you have eczema or whatever, yeah, you need to be considerate of what's going on in your body and change that. But if you're 60, you're going to do something slightly differently. And I think it's a question of what you're looking for at what time. But if I'm having a baby today, my God, test them. There is so much information. You don't have to be the worried parent. On the contrary, you can be the parent driving optimal performance in your child. So that's a very different proposition than if you're 60 and have all sorts of clinical, subclinical conditions. Sleep clearly has been proved in the last few years to be absolutely essential. But I think, again, it's not a one-size-fits-all. So you have to look at multiple things that we probably don't know that much about yet. Circadian rhythms, complicated. I know personally that I function best neurologically between 11 p.m. and 2 a.m. I function simply better. But I don't allow myself to be up at that time because there's enough evidence to say that's detrimental in the long term.
Excellent. So I got a challenge on that from a sleep researcher. On one of my last interviews, he said, when you look at the long-term data, people are worse off, but it's probably more because of co-founders and how society is set up. So that you would probably actually be better off if you can structure your day perfectly so you get your 8 hours.
Yeah, I agree. And I think, but I know that when I was firing on all cylinders in my early 30s, I suddenly started getting, my legs were shaking. And I found it was at 3 o'clock in the morning. And I was going, this is clearly not good. I would be allowed by my family to sleep late in the morning because I'm a B person, 100%. I never have a meeting before 10 a.m. because I just don't know if I don't use an alarm clock. I wake up when my body needs it or when it wants to. And therefore I don't try and push things even today. However, when I changed my sleep back then, I got my shaking, my legs went away, my performance ultimately got better. But those hours in the early morning when I was very, very neurologically productive perhaps fell away. So I think, again, you can't live the perfect life. So what's realistic should also be considered. And then movement. I'm sort of tired about this idea that everyone has to go to the gym. I don't know where that came from. It's a very good marketing ploy by certain people. In this country that we live in, we're very privileged to be able to pretty much everybody go out on a bike. And that is why the Danes, Aura did this wonderful piece of research, I don't know if you saw that showed that the average heart age compared to chronological age was younger in people that wore an Oura ring. Perhaps not surprising because we're all considering what we're doing. But Scandinavia was 2 years younger again than the average Oura ring wearer. But I came here to Denmark in 1994. It's an environment which encourages people to get on a bike and cycle. You don't have to be sweating when you get on a bike. You can just cycle through the city and you have done a lot of good for your body. And walking, I walk at least once a week from my house to my work. It's 7 kilometers. I walk and talk, or I just enjoy the environment. It's not that much work. If I stay in a hotel, which I'd spend a lot of time in, I would try wherever I can to find the stairway. I don't care if it's the 25th floor. I will walk up and down. It takes me 5 minutes to walk up And if I'm very quick running down, probably only a couple of minutes. It's not long, but we find any number of excuses. The single biggest bugbear I have is when I get on an escalator and someone's standing still. Why are you standing still on an escalator? People can do very simple things to change their function in their body, but they don't do it. And that frustrates me. So that movement is not a gym. It's a bicycle, it's a walk, it's brisk movements. It could be house cleaning, it could be gardening. That's okay. Yes, it's true that muscle building is important. So how do we do that? And are we going to be able to ensure that as we go through our 50s and into our 60s that we have enough muscle mass? I understand that. And there's a lot of good science coming out around it. But for the average Joe, get moving.
We also see the blue zones. They don't go to gyms. The blue zones where they live to 100 or older.
Yeah.
They often live a place where they also go up the hill and they have communities, but it's natural movement and using the body.
Yeah. And that community thing is a complicated one as well, because what drives humanity is community, naturally, but within that, there are leaders and there are followers. And who is who? You have to understand who you are. So I'm the type of provocative individual that does not take at face value everything anyone says. I want to understand it. But in doing so, I'm going to either ostracize myself or be outside of that cluster. For me, it's fine. I don't want to be necessarily part of the cluster. Others find the best performance for them in the middle of the cluster. So understanding who we are and be honest with yourself and your psychology is enormously important, because that protects the integrity of that biology that we have.
Before we end off, Chris, because time is running, what are some of the things you're most excited about in the future when we're looking at longevity, or if we skip longevity and just look at health?
Yeah, I mean, my number one excitement is that we now have so much knowledge that an infant born today can live to 100 without disease. That I'm no doubt about. But that means you've got to start testing. You've got to understand that person is an individual. N equals 1 is important. And look after them by challenging their own biology and being aware that they're exposed. So when do they get their first infection? When do they get their first food, solids? When do they go to school? When do they have their first emotional breakdown, which might be anything from a friend that doesn't like them anymore to a grandparent that dies? All these things shape us. And then the interaction of this horrific, which I really believe horrific, environmental toxin exposure. This we have to be very careful of. And we're going to get better and better tests around this to show that you have pesticides in the body, you have plastics in the body, you have heavy metals in the body, you have fungus in the body. And a couple of weeks ago, I did a very nice experiment on myself. I did what's called inosphoresis, which is similar to plasmapheresis, but without removing the plasma. It filters the blood. And between first and second session, I saw my couple of mycotoxins that I had in my body. One of them disappeared, and the other one was reduced by 50%. That is compelling. It's also very expensive, so most people aren't going to do it. But that shows us that we have more knowledge about how we function, and we should be aware of it and should look after the integrity of the body. So I think that's my excitement is we have this information. We have wearables, as you alluded to earlier. Use them. They're not perfect, but they give you more information about how you function. I have a chip in my arm that measures temperature. I'm absolutely convinced that our future is longitudinal data sets that give us warning signs about what might happen. So if we employ 2020's technology, knowledge, science, and then impact it with the children especially, then we will see healthcare costs fall, not go up.
And in regards to finding someone to help guide you in this, a practitioner, you have met thousands of practitioners, been part of training thousands of practitioners. How do you find a functional medicine practitioner to work with?
I feel a little bit sorry for the world of clinicians today coming into functional medicine, because when we started in the 90s, we were able to say, the focus is immunity. So we did immune tests. Then it was digestion. Okay, we do digestion and stool tests. So we had immunity and digestion. Oh, now we're looking at endocrinology and hormones. Okay, now we've got immune, digestion, hormones. Then it's toxins. Oh, and then it's maybe cancer markers. And then it's maybe cardiovascular. And you build all this up over years and years and years. In our case, 30 years. A doctor coming into this today with all their enthusiasm, with all their inherent understanding, cannot possibly know all this within the first year of becoming a so-called functional medicine doctor. That's not to say they don't have real skills and that they have the potential, but it is true that they can't possibly have the knowledge of someone who has 30 years of experience. So that's the first thing. Think about who you're going to and what their real skills are. Me, as in my job, what I'm looking for are those clinicians which have the curiosity to learn. And that's not every doctor. And that's not to say there's not great doctors that don't have curiosity. I'm just saying that in a functional medicine world, you must have curiosity because we do not have all the answers. So that doctor that does training every single month, goes on courses, and most of these good functional medicine doctors pay themselves, right? That's indicative of their commitment. So look at those practitioners who have an array of education, that they constantly challenge themselves, that they prioritize their weekends to learn about your health or our health, that they then employ new technologies quickly when they show the value, and be very cautious about the doctor who's never changed in 20 years.
I agree. It's hard, and there's so much to learn. And then it's super interesting with AI, how that can be support actually both for doctors and us as patients. I'm blown away with how good it is if you know how to prompt it, giving it some data. I still don't trust it fully. I still like it to actually get verified.
I think we have to be very careful about the naivety of tech. Humans require humans. That's how we thrive. So a tech telling you how to perform without the nuances of human contact and understanding and querying, I think we have to be very careful. I'm not dismissing the fact that it's clearly going to have a big impact, but I would be very, very cautious currently of using that environment to be my dictator of my health. But I would want to employ querying together with a doctor that is excited about my health. That's what I want. I remember 20 years ago thinking, if I was a GP and I got to the end of the year, I was going to send a letter out to I think in Denmark we have an average of 3,000 or 4,000 patients, present GPs. I would send a letter out to them all and say, as of the 1st of January, I'm closing down my general practice. I'm only going to have 250 patients a year, and it's going to cost you €1,000 to be part of that. I would want to pay €1,000 for a doctor that only saw 250 patients a year, because I know their investment in me would be focused and interested, and my job would be to work with them to become the optimum that I am. That's not really possible. But the idea of it is that you are participatory in your health. Please don't think that a doctor has enough knowledge about you or AI has enough information about you. You have enough information and you have to query yourself. And if people do that, they will build resilience against the vagaries of disease and live a longer and healthier life.
That's a good ending. Chris, we could talk for hours. We often do.
Yeah, we do.
But this is capped also because there's a workshop now. And I know that you have a busy schedule, but thank you so much for coming in.
Pleasure, Mads. Thank you very much.